Today I was supposed to sign my first house purchase letter, but instead, the bank clerk looked at me with a pale face and said that I had a mysterious debt of $487,000, almost $7.5 billion. And the craziest part of this story? The culprit was not the hacker, but my own biological parents who forged my signature for 10 years. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Noah Bennett. I'm 33 years old, and until that morning, I honestly believed I had everything under control. I had spent almost 10 years building my career as a senior software engineer in Seattle. Long nights, weekend deployments, missed vacations. Every bonus I received went straight into savings because I had one goal. A home, not a mansion. Just a place where Emily and I could finally stop renewing apartment leases every year and start building a life together. Emily squeezed my hand as we walked into the bank. "You look nervous," she said with a smile. "I've never signed papers this expensive before," she laughed. "You'll survive." I hope so. We had already found the house, a quiet neighborhood with tall maple trees, a small backyard, and enough space for the dog Emily kept promising we'd adopt after moving in. For weeks, we'd been talking about paint colors, furniture, and where we'd put our bookshelves. Everything finally felt like it was coming together. Sarah Mitchell, the loan officer, welcomed us into her office with the kind of confidence that immediately put me at ease. She looked through our paperwork. "Everything seems organized," she said. "This shouldn't take too long." I leaned back in my chair. Emily gave me that little smile that always said, "See? I told you." Sarah typed for another minute, then another. The smile on her face slowly disappeared. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe the system was loading. Maybe she was checking another document, but she stopped typing. She stared at the monitor without saying anything. "You okay?" I asked. She looked at me, then back at the screen. "I'm sorry, could you give me a moment?" Emily and I exchanged a quick glance. Sarah clicked through several pages. Her expression kept changing. Confused, then concerned. Finally, almost alarmed. "I think there may be an error," she said quietly. I actually laughed. "That's good to hear. Errors can be fixed." "I hope that's what this is." She turned the monitor slightly toward herself again, reading something carefully. "Mr. Bennett, yes? According to your credit report, you currently owe $487,000. I blinked. "I'm sorry. What?" $487,000. I couldn't stop myself from laughing again. There has to be another Noah Bennett. Sarah didn't laugh. I looked at Emily. She smiled awkwardly. "This has to be someone else," she said. "Exactly," I replied. "Probably same name." Sarah slowly shook her head. "I checked that first." She clicked another page. "The social security number matches." I frowned. "What?" "Your full legal name matches." Another click. "Your date of birth matches." Another click. "Your previous addresses also match." The room suddenly felt much quieter. I leaned forward. "That's impossible." "I understand why you'd think that." "No, I mean literally impossible." I had never missed a payment in my life. One credit card. Paid every month, one car loan, finished 3 years early. I even checked my credit score every few months because I knew we'd eventually apply for a mortgage. Nothing had ever looked unusual. Emily reached for my arm. "Noah, I don't understand." Sarah printed several pages and carefully placed them on the desk between us. "There are multiple loans." I picked up the papers. Home equity loans, personal loans, business credit lines. Some of them dated back almost 10 years. I kept flipping pages faster and faster. "No." I whispered it before I even realized I was speaking. "No, I've never signed any of this." Sarah nodded gently. "I believe you." I looked up. "Then how is this even here?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she folded her hands on the desk and met my eyes with the kind of expression people use before delivering terrible news. She took a slow breath. "Mr. Bennett." I waited. "Whoever did this knew everything about you." I couldn't take my eyes off the stack of papers. Every page made less sense than the one before. Sarah gave me time to read without interrupting. Emily stayed beside me, but I could feel her watching my face more than the documents. There has to be a mistake, I muttered. I've reviewed your report twice, Sarah said carefully. If this is fraud, it's a very extensive one. She pointed to one section. These accounts weren't opened all at once. I looked closer. One credit card? Then another almost a year later. A car loan, a personal loan, a line of credit. Then something much bigger. A home equity loan. The date stretched across nearly 10 years. Whoever had done this hadn't stolen my identity for one quick payday. They had built an entire financial life using my name. Sarah printed another report. I recommend requesting your complete credit history from all 3 bureaus. You'll need every record. I nodded, though my mind was already somewhere else. Emily drove us home because I couldn't focus on the road. Neither of us spoke much. At one red light, she reached over and squeezed my hand. We'll figure this out. I don't even know where to start. We start with facts. That evening, our dining table disappeared under piles of paperwork. Laptop open, printer running, coffee growing cold. For hours, we downloaded reports and compared dates. Every time I thought I'd found the last fake account, another one appeared. I've never owned this car, I said. Emily looked over my shoulder. I've never even been to that dealership. A few minutes later, I never applied for this personal loan either. Another click. What is this? Emily frowned. Home equity loan? I've never owned a house. The words sounded ridiculous coming out of my mouth. How could someone borrow against a house that wasn't even mine? The deeper we dug, the stranger everything became. The balances changed over the years. Some loans had been paid off. Others had simply been refinanced. Someone had been actively managing these accounts. It wasn't random. It was organized. I opened another document and froze. Emily. What? Look at the billing address. She leaned closer. It wasn't my apartment. It wasn't any address I'd lived at as an adult. It was the house where I grew up, my parents' home. I stared at it for several seconds. There has to be another explanation. Emily didn't answer immediately. She looked through the next account, then another, then another. They're all going there. My stomach tightened. No. It could just be where someone intercepted your mail. How? She didn't have an answer. Neither did I. I tried thinking logically. Maybe I'd forgotten updating an address years ago. Maybe the records were outdated. Maybe none of those explanations worked. These statements had been mailed there for years, not months, years. Emily broke the silence. Noah. I looked at her. Can I ask you something? Sure. Have your parents ever handled your financial paperwork? I shrugged. When I was younger. Bank forms? College paperwork? Tax documents? Sometimes. I rubbed my forehead. My dad always liked taking care of forms. He'd tell me where to sign because he said I was too impatient to read everything. Emily didn't say anything. She simply looked back at the papers. That silence somehow felt louder than any accusation. If you've ever trusted someone so completely that questioning them feels wrong, you'll understand why my mind kept rejecting the obvious. And if you've experienced anything similar, let me know in the comments. Sometimes hearing someone else's story reminds us we're not facing impossible moments alone. Around midnight, I found another file buried inside an old digital archive I downloaded. It was a scanned loan application from years earlier. The signature stopped me cold. At first glance, it looked exactly like mine. Same looping N, same sharp line under the last name. But I kept staring. The spacing was slightly off. The way I crossed the T wasn't quite right. It looked like someone had practiced writing my signature until they almost perfected it. Emily whispered, "That's not how you sign now. It's not how I signed back then either." She looked up at me. "Noah." I pushed my chair back. "I can't do this over the phone." "What are you thinking?" I grabbed my car keys from the counter. "I'm driving to my parents' house." Emily stood too. "Tonight?" I looked at the stack of papers one more time before slipping the copied signature into a folder. I've spent hours hoping there's another explanation. I headed for the front door. They deserve the chance to give me one. The drive to my parents' house felt longer than it ever had. Emily sat quietly in the passenger seat. She offered to stay behind, but I didn't want to walk into that house alone. The porch light was still on when we pulled into the driveway. Nothing looked different. The flower beds my mom loved. My dad's old pickup parked beside the garage. It looked like the same home I'd visited dozens of times. I knocked. A few seconds later, my mother opened the door. "Noah?" she said, surprised. "It's almost midnight." She smiled when she saw Emily. "What are you two doing here?" I didn't answer her question. "Is Dad awake?" Her smile faded a little. Yeah. A minute later, we were all sitting around the kitchen table, the same table where we'd celebrated birthdays and Thanksgiving dinners. My father looked confused. "Son, what's going on?" I placed the folder on the table. "I need someone to explain these." Neither of them reached for it. Dad glanced at Mom. Mom glanced back at him. It lasted only a second, but I noticed. "I went to the bank today," I said. "We were supposed to buy our first house." Mom smiled gently. "That's wonderful." "No." I shook my head. "It didn't happen." Dad frowned. "What do you mean?" I was denied. I slid the credit report toward him. "They say I owe almost $500,000. Neither of them spoke. I waited. Still nothing. "I've never taken these loans." Silence. "The billing addresses lead here." Mom finally looked down at the papers. Dad folded his arms. "There has to be some mistake," he said. "I thought so too." I pulled out another document. "What about this signature?" He barely looked at it. "It looks like yours." "It isn't." Mom tried to smile. "Noah, sweetheart, these companies make errors all the time." I leaned forward. "They all have my social security number." No answer. "My birthday." Nothing. "My old addresses." Dad rubbed his forehead. "This isn't something we can figure out tonight." "No." My voice came out calmer than I expected. "We're figuring it out right now." Emily hadn't spoken since we arrived. She quietly laid another page on the table. "This loan was opened 9 years ago." Then another. "And this one." Then another. "They all connect back here." My father let out a long breath. Mom stared at her hands. Nobody moved. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, Dad spoke. "It wasn't supposed to get this far." I looked at him. "What?" Mom closed her eyes. "It started with one loan." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dad continued without looking at me. The business was collapsing. His small construction company. I remembered it. Business had slowed years ago, but they always told me everything was under control. "It wasn't," he admitted. "The bank wouldn't lend us more money." "So, you borrowed it in my name?" He nodded once. "We thought we'd pay it back before you ever noticed." I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because my brain didn't know what else to do. "Before I noticed?" "It was temporary," Mom said quickly. "We were desperate." I stared at her. "Temporary?" Dad swallowed. "One loan became 2. The interest kept growing," Mom whispered. "We used a new loan to pay the old one. And then another. And another." Each sentence felt heavier than the last. "So you've been pretending to be me for almost 10 years? Neither of them corrected me. That silence was answer enough. I stood up and stepped away from the table. Emily followed, but didn't interrupt. She simply rested a hand against my back. I couldn't even look at my parents. Every memory from my childhood suddenly felt different. Every time they told me they were proud of me. Every time they asked for copies of documents, every form they offered to help me fill out. I turned back toward them. "You destroyed my credit." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "We were trying to save the family." I stared at her. "The family? You had a good job. We knew you'd recover someday." I couldn't believe those words had actually come out of her mouth. "We kept the business alive. We kept this house. We thought eventually we'd fix everything." "Dad and I never wanted to hurt you." Emily's face tightened. "You didn't just hurt him," she said quietly. "You stole 10 years of his future?" Nobody answered her. Dad slowly stood. His shoulders looked smaller than I'd ever seen them. Son. His voice cracked. Please. I finally met his eyes. Don't go to the police. He took one slow step toward me. If you do, he struggled to finish the sentence. We'll lose everything. My dad's words stayed with me the entire drive home. We'll lose everything. Nobody said much. Emily watched the road while I stared out the window. I kept replaying the conversation, hoping I'd misunderstood something. I hadn't. By the time we reached our apartment, my phone was already vibrating. Mom, I let it ring. Then Dad. I ignored that too. A minute later came a text. Please don't do anything tonight. Let's talk as a family. I didn't answer. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those loan documents spread across my parents' kitchen table. Around 8 the next morning, my Aunt Susan called. She didn't even ask how I was. I heard you went over to your parents' house. I frowned. Who told you? Your mother. Of course she had. Aunt Susan, I really don't... She cut me off. Your parents made mistakes. Mistakes? They were trying to survive. I sat down at the edge of the couch. They stole my identity. They borrowed your name. I actually pulled the phone away from my ear for a second. Did she really just say that? They're not the same thing. They're family, Noah. So am I. She sighed heavily. You've always had a good career. I couldn't believe where this conversation was going. You'll recover? What about the last 10 years? They didn't mean to hurt you. I ended the call before I said something I'd regret. Emily walked out of the kitchen, holding 2 mugs of coffee. Your aunt? I nodded. She thinks I should just... move on. Emily handed me a mug. And what do you think? I don't even know anymore. The calls didn't stop. An uncle, a cousin, even neighbors I'd known since I was a kid somehow had opinions. Most of them said the same thing. They're your parents. Don't destroy the family. They sacrificed everything to raise you. Nobody asked what this had done to me. Nobody asked about the house Emily and I had lost, or the years it might take to repair my credit. I started wondering if I was the selfish one. That thought scared me. Emily noticed it before I did. You've gone quiet, she said that evening. I'm thinking. No. She sat beside me. You're blaming yourself. I wanted to argue. Instead, I looked down at my untouched dinner. I keep thinking, what, if I report them? I couldn't finish the sentence. Emily waited. My parents could lose everything. She nodded slowly. And if you don't? I looked at her. You lose everything. Her words weren't angry. They were calm. That somehow made them harder to ignore. A few days later, my cousin Daniel asked if we could meet for coffee. We'd always gotten along. He looked nervous before we even ordered. You okay? I asked. He rubbed his hands together. Not really. We sat in silence for a moment. Finally, he leaned forward. I need to tell you something. I felt my stomach tighten. What is it? He glanced around the cafe before lowering his voice. I knew something wasn't right years ago. I stared at him. What do you mean? I was helping your dad organize paperwork after a flood in the garage. And I saw loan files with your name. I didn't move. I asked him why your information was on everything. What did he say? He told me you were helping the business. I let out a slow breath. And you believed him? At first. Daniel looked ashamed. But later. He swallowed. I realized you probably had no idea. I couldn't even find the words. You knew? He nodded. I should have asked you. Why didn't you? He looked down into his coffee. Because everyone kept saying it was temporary. Another pause. They told me it was family business. I laughed quietly. Not because it was funny, because apparently everyone had been protecting the secret except me. If you've ever been the last person to learn the truth about your own life, you probably know how lonely that feels. If this story speaks to you, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel reach more people. Daniel looked at me one last time. I'm sorry, Noah. I know. And I believed he meant it. When I got back to the apartment, Emily was waiting by the window. How did it go? I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she took a long breath. They've had years to protect themselves. I nodded. You've had less than a week to protect yourself. She reached into her bag, pulled out a business card, and placed it on the table between us. I looked down. It belonged to an attorney who specialized in identity theft and financial fraud. Emily met my eyes. Before you make any decision, she gently pushed the card closer. I think it's time you heard what a lawyer has to say. The attorney's office was nothing like I expected. No giant courtroom portraits, no dramatic speeches. Just a quiet room, a stack of legal files, and a man named Daniel Foster, who listened more than he talked. He let me tell the entire story without interrupting. The bank, the loans, my parents' confession, the family asking me to stay quiet. When I finished, he opened the folder I'd brought and started reading through every document. Every few minutes, he'd underline something or place a small sticky note on a page. The silence made me nervous. Finally, he looked up. Mr. Bennett, I know this is complicated. He shook his head. Actually, legally, it's very straightforward. I waited. If someone opened financial accounts using your identity without your authorization, that's identity theft. Even if they're my parents? Especially if they're your parents. That wasn't the answer I expected. I looked down at the table. So what happens if I don't report it? Daniel folded his hands. I want you to understand something. His voice stayed calm. The banks currently believe these debts belong to you. I nodded. If you don't formally dispute them and cooperate with the investigation, many of those lenders may continue treating you as the responsible borrower. I felt my chest tighten. So I could spend years paying loans I never took? That's a real possibility. Emily looked at me, but didn't say anything. Daniel continued. You also mentioned wanting to buy your first home. Yes. Until this is resolved, that becomes much more difficult. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was simply telling me the truth. For the first time since this nightmare started, I realized there might not be a way to protect both my parents and myself. Before leaving, I asked one question. If they admitted everything to me, does that help? It helps establish facts. He paused. But you'll still need evidence. That afternoon, I called my parents. We need to meet. Dad agreed almost immediately. We met at a small diner halfway between our homes. The waitress brought coffee. Nobody touched it. Dad looked exhausted. Mom's eyes were red before we even sat down. I took a slow breath. I'm giving you one last chance. Neither of them spoke. I don't want revenge. I don't want to destroy anyone. I just need to know how we're fixing this. Mom reached across the table. We just need more time. I leaned back. Time for what? We'll figure something out. You've had almost 10 years. Dad finally spoke. The business might recover. Might? We're trying. I shook my head. The bank denied me because of this. I know. My credit is destroyed. I know. I could be legally responsible. Dad looked away. I know. Every answer sounded the same. No plan, no numbers, no lawyer, no repayment schedule, just hope. And hope wasn't going to erase nearly $500,000. Mom quietly wiped away a tear. We never wanted this. I believe you. She looked relieved for half a second. Then I continued. But wanting something and doing it are different. Nobody argued. The conversation simply stopped. As we stood to leave, Dad hugged me. I didn't hug him back. Not because I hated him, because I didn't know who I was hugging anymore. Back at Daniel Foster's office the following morning, he had another file waiting. I reviewed the signatures more closely. He spread several loan documents across the desk. Some were from different banks, different years, different lenders. At first glance, they all looked identical. Then he pointed to small details. The pressure changes. The letter spacing changes. This curve appears copied. I stared at the pages. What does that mean? In my opinion, these weren't signed by the same person naturally. He looked directly at me. I believe dozens of these signatures were forged. Dozens. Not one. Not 5. Dozens. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Daniel slid one final paper toward me. This is the packet needed to begin reporting the identity theft. He didn't push me. He didn't tell me what to do. He simply said, "The decision has to be yours. If you've been following my story this far, thank you. Your support means more than you know, and I'd like to hear what you think you would do in my position." An hour later, I parked outside the local police station. The paperwork sat on the passenger seat. I turned off the engine. People walked in and out of the building like it was any ordinary day. I picked up the folder, opened the car door, then stopped. My hand tightened around the papers as I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the entrance, unable to decide whether I was ready to walk through those doors. I stood there for almost 5 minutes. People walked past me without paying attention. A woman pushed a stroller through the front doors. An officer walked out carrying a cup of coffee. Life kept moving. Mine felt completely frozen. Then my phone buzzed. It was Emily. "Whatever you decide, make sure you're protecting the future we're trying to build." I read the message twice. Then I slipped my phone into my pocket and walked inside. The woman at the front desk looked up. "How can I help you?" I swallowed. "I need to report identity theft." She nodded. "I'll have someone meet with you." About 20 minutes later, I found myself sitting across from Detective Marcus Hill. He looked to be in his early 50s, calm, professional. He let me explain everything from the beginning. The bank, the mortgage denial, my parents' confession, the forged signatures. He wrote notes the entire time. When I finished, he closed his notebook. "I'm sorry you're going through this." I nodded. I never imagined I'd be sitting here. Most people don't. He asked for every document I had, credit reports, loan statements, copies of signatures, even screenshots of text messages from my parents. "I'll also need the names of every financial institution involved." I handed him the list Daniel Foster had helped me organize. Marcus looked at it for a moment. "This is extensive." "I know. We'll start requesting records immediately." The investigation didn't move overnight. Some banks responded quickly. Others took weeks. During that time, I still had to go to work. I joined software meetings in the morning, smile through video calls, and answer questions about deadlines. Then I'd spend my lunch break talking to fraud departments. Every afternoon, another envelope seemed to arrive. Some asked for more paperwork. Others confirmed another account had been opened in my name. Emily became my unofficial assistant. She built a spreadsheet to keep track of everything. Dates, banks, loan balances, case numbers. Without her, I honestly think I would have lost track. One evening, she looked up from her laptop. "I thought there were 11 accounts." There were. She turned the screen toward me. "Now there are 16. I stared at the list. 16? "A bank just confirmed another line of credit," Marcus called the following afternoon. "So far, nothing suggests you personally benefited from any of these loans." I finally let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "That's important?" "It's very important." He explained investigators were tracing where the money actually went. Payments, transfers, business accounts. Every document helped build the timeline. "The pattern is becoming very clear," he said. "This appears to have been an ongoing scheme lasting nearly 10 years. Hearing someone else say it out loud made everything feel painfully real. Not one bad decision. Years of repeated choices. That night, Emily ordered takeout because neither of us felt like cooking. We ate on the living room floor, surrounded by folders. She smiled a little. "When this is over," she looked around the apartment. "I'm still buying that house with you." I smiled for the first time in days. "I'll hold you to that." For a few minutes, we talked about ordinary things again. Vacation plans, movies we'd missed, the dog she'd always wanted. Those small conversations reminded me that not everything in my life had been taken away. If you've made it this far into my story, thank you for staying with me. Your support really does make a difference. A few days later, Marcus asked me to come back to the station. Several thick folders were waiting on the table. I've reviewed records from multiple banks. There are more accounts than we originally thought. More? He nodded. 23 so far. I couldn't speak. Marcus pulled one document from the stack and set it aside. This one is different. I looked at him. Why? He tapped the page. It's the piece of evidence that may tell us exactly who forged the signatures on all those loan applications. Marcus slid the document across the table. It came from one of the lenders, he said. I looked down. It was another loan application. At first, it looked no different from the others. Then Marcus placed another sheet beside it. This is a verified signature from your driver's license renewal. Then another. And this one is from your employment records. He gave me a moment to compare them. Even I could see the differences now. The rhythm of the letters, the pressure, the spacing. The forged signatures were close. Close enough to fool a bank employee. Not close enough to fool a forensic document examiner. Marcus leaned back. The examiner's opinion is very clear. I looked up. The majority of the signatures on these loan documents were not written by you. For the first time since this nightmare began, someone had officially confirmed what I'd been saying all along. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't responsible. I was a victim. That realization didn't make me happy. It just made me tired. Over the next several weeks, investigators gathered more records. My parents were interviewed more than once. This time, they couldn't deny what had happened. Too many documents, too many timelines, too much evidence. Eventually, my attorney called. They've stopped disputing the forgery findings. I closed my eyes. So, they admitted it? Yes. I thanked him and ended the call. Emily was sitting across the room reading. She looked up immediately. What happened? They admitted it. She put her book down and walked over. She didn't celebrate. She simply wrapped her arms around me. I'm sorry, she whispered. That surprised me. Why are you saying sorry? Because being right doesn't erase what you've lost. She understood something a lot of people didn't. Winning a legal case doesn't automatically heal a broken family. The weeks that followed were strangely quiet. Most of my relatives stopped calling. Some unfriended me on social media. Family birthdays happened without invitations. Photos were posted online. I wasn't in any of them. For a while, that hurt more than I expected. Then one afternoon, my phone rang. It was Mom. I almost didn't answer, but I did. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said my name. Noah. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I don't expect you to forgive me. I stayed silent. I spent months trying to convince myself we did it for the family. She paused. I don't believe that anymore. I closed my eyes. We had choices. Another pause. We chose the wrong ones. There was no excuse this time, no blaming the economy, no talking about sacrifice, just the truth. I'm sorry, she whispered. I should have protected you. I wanted to say something profound. Instead, all I managed was, I wish you had. Neither of us cried. Neither of us argued. The conversation ended quietly. When I hung up, I sat on the balcony for a long time. Emily joined me with 2 cups of coffee. You okay? I don't know. She smiled gently. That's an honest answer. I looked out across the city. For months I'd been carrying anger everywhere. Some of it was still there. But underneath it, there was something else. Acceptance. Not because everything was fixed. Because I finally understood that some relationships never return to what they once were. And pretending otherwise only keeps the wound open. If you've stayed with my story this far, thank you. I'd love to know what you would have done in my place, so feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Nearly 3 years passed. My credit slowly recovered. The fraudulent accounts were removed one by one. Emily and I kept working toward the future we'd postponed. Life wasn't perfect, but it was finally moving forward again. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a bank I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. The woman on the line politely asked, "Mr. Bennett, do you have a few minutes to discuss an account connected to your name?" Mr. Bennett, do you have a few minutes to discuss an account connected to your name? For a second, my stomach dropped. All those old fears came rushing back. I stepped out of my office and closed the door behind me. What kind of account? The woman quickly added, "Nothing is wrong, I promise." I let out a nervous laugh. "You probably shouldn't open a conversation like that." "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm calling about your mortgage application." I froze. "My mortgage?" "Yes." She paused while pulling up my file. "I'm happy to tell you your application has been approved." I didn't say anything, not because I hadn't heard her, because I had spent so many months expecting bad news that I didn't know how to react to good news anymore. She kept talking about interest rates, closing dates, and paperwork. I wrote everything down. When the call ended, I just stood there holding my phone. Emily found me a few minutes later. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I looked at her. "They approved us." She blinked. "What?" "They approved the mortgage." For a second, she just stared. Then she laughed. Then she cried. Then she hugged me so tightly I almost dropped my phone. A month later, we unlocked the front door of our first home. It wasn't huge. It wasn't fancy. But every room felt earned. We walked through the empty house without saying much. Emily stood in the kitchen trying to imagine where everything would go. I wandered into the living room and looked out the front window. For years, I'd imagined that moment. It almost disappeared because of decisions I never made. That evening, we ordered pizza and sat on the hardwood floor with paper plates. No furniture, just two people surrounded by moving boxes. Emily smiled. "So, what? I think it's finally time." "For what?" She pulled out her phone. "A dog." I laughed. "You really never gave up on that." "Never." It felt good to laugh without forcing it. Life slowly settled into something normal again. Not perfect, just normal. My credit score recovered little by little. The legal process finally came to an end. Most of the fraudulent debt was officially removed from my record. It took years, but it happened. The harder part wasn't financial, it was personal. I saw my parents only a handful of times after everything. Usually at weddings, once at a funeral. We spoke politely, asked simple questions. "How's work? How have you been?" Conversations that lasted 2 or 3 minutes before silence took over. The trust we'd lost never quietly came back. One afternoon, Mom mailed me an old photo. It was from my 10th birthday. Dad had his arm around my shoulders. Both of us were smiling. There wasn't a letter inside, just the picture. I kept it. Not because it erased what happened, it didn't. But it reminded me that people can love you and still make choices that leave permanent damage. Both things can be true. Emily found the photo sitting on my desk. "You keeping it?" I nodded. "I think so." She didn't ask why. She simply slipped it back into the envelope. That was enough. Sometimes people ask me if I forgive my parents. The honest answer is, I don't know if forgiveness is one single moment. Some days, I feel closer to it. Some days, I remember the years we lost. What I do know is this. Protecting myself wasn't an act of betrayal. Reporting what happened didn't make me a bad son. It gave me the chance to have a future that was actually mine. The house Emily and I live in today wasn't built on someone else's lies. It was built on honest work, patience, and a decision that was harder than I ever imagined making. I still wish none of it had happened. I still wish my parents had trusted me enough to ask for help instead of taking my identity. That wish probably won't ever disappear. But every morning, when I unlock my own front door after work, I know the name on the mortgage belongs to the person who actually signed it, me. And somehow, after everything, that's enough. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you for listening to my story. I genuinely like to know what you think. If someone in your own family had done what mine did, would you have reported it or would you have tried to solve it another way? I'd love to read your thoughts and experiences in the comments.